Please note before you engage in this work. By my own admission, this book is mostly in the realm of philosophy, but also contains spiritual as well as scientific ideas which I have strived to present as accurately and clearly as possible, based on current knowledge. So ultimately you may consider it a work of interdisciplinary speculation, which is always open to reinterpretation or rejection based on new discoveries. And while a large percentage of this book is written in a manner that is entertaining and appealing to a broad audience, and also engages in philosophical and spiritual ideas, I have attempted to make any specific, speculative declarations made adhere to the scientific process as far as it is possible within a book primarily intended for a diverse audience. It is still possible and even probable that I will unintentionally make several mistakes which I will hopefully correct over time, as in when new discoveries insights come to my notice. So even though this is technically a finished work, it is still ironically a work in progress. I have also attempted to battle confirmation bias, in other words, the tendency to only look for and reconfirm what you already believe in, by looking at as many objections as possible and providing resolutions to them wherever I can. As much as reasonably feasible in a book primarily meant for the curious, general public. Of course, sometimes most of the available evidence clearly points to certain facts, so obviously I will treat them as such, so don't say I'm practicing confirmation bias if I refuse to accept your theory that the Earth is flat. In other words, I am well aware that this is no academic or peer-reviewed work in the traditional sense, and I am not getting any awards for the same. But if it can inspire some scientists, philosophers in the future to consider a path of investigation that they have not previously considered, I have done my job. Introduction: The Infinite Containment Paradox. It is my opinion that everything must be based on a simple idea. And it is my opinion that this idea, once we have finally discovered it, will be so compelling, so beautiful that we will say to one another, yes, how could it have been any different? Dr. John Archibald Wheeler. The task is not so much to see what no one has yet seen, but to think what nobody has yet thought about that which everybody sees. Erwin Schrödinger. Here is a weird thought experiment I had as a child that drove me crazy, and well into adulthood, I had not the faintest answer to it. At one point I just gave it up until I decided to pick it up again for this book. The thought experiment was, we know there is space, there are galaxies and stars, but what is beyond that space? What is beyond the edge of the universe, or is there an edge at all? If there is nothing beyond that universe, then what the heck is our universe doing in the middle of nothing? Now, if there is something beyond this universe, maybe more universes, then what is beyond that? If there is a boundary for these universes beyond which there is nothing, then what is this cluster of universes doing in the middle of this nothing? Let's think of it this way. For the longest time, people wondered what lay beyond the Earth. They wondered what would happen at the edge of it. Inevitably, they discovered that, but instead of giving a satisfactory resolution, it led to more questions as to what beyond. Questions we are still trying to answer. Similarly, scientists will inevitably discover what lies beyond the physical universe if there is anything at all. For example's sake, let us assume it's a multiverse. But then it brings us back to the same question. What lies beyond those? And if there is nothing beyond that multiverse, then what the hell is that multiverse doing in the middle of nothing? Modern science has revealed that galaxies aren't actually drifting away into empty space, rather space itself is being stretched like a fabric, similar to how a balloon expands. But this begs another question. 1. If we keep expanding, what do we expand into? 2. If we expand into something, what does that something expand into? When does infinite regress end, and does it end at all? How can we keep perpetually expanding into nothing? Another clarification: some people will say nothing isn't really nothing, but rather there are quantum fluctuations in the nothing as well. Yes, that is true, but as of now we know to be true only for the physical nothing, a vacuum within spacetime. The nothing we are talking about is beyond that physical vacuum, it is beyond time and space itself, it is beyond universes or speculative multiverses. You could call it an absolute nothing compared to the physical nothing with quantum fluctuations within our universe. As you can see, this is an infinite loop with no answer. Every answer to the beyond comes up with another question: what beyond that? The heart of this thought experiment, though, is not really what lies beyond, but the question, if there is nothing beyond, then what are we doing in the middle of this nothingness? It goes straight to the heart of existence itself. Let's consider an example that is relevant, at least in 2024. Imagine a video game where all the gameplay lies on a map and everything is there on that map, and outside that map there is just complete blackness, an impenetrable boundary for the video game characters that they can never go beyond. Their existence is literally in the middle of nothingness. Similarly, understanding what you and I are doing in the middle of this nothing on a cosmic scale is the real puzzle of existence. After the video game analogy, some of you would say we are existing in a simulation, like video game characters. Well, then what beyond that? What universe do the developers of that video game exist in? Where does the infinite regress end? And if they ultimately exist in the middle of absolute nothing, then what are they doing there? What this means: a so-called ultimate reality that we are looking for is simply impossible to exist within a purely physical universe or a multiverse or beyond, because everything that exists physically has to exist within something. It cannot physically exist within nothing, because a nothing that can hold something itself has to physically exist within something, again leading to an infinite regress. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the infinite containment paradox. And this paradox of infinite containment leaves us with two possibilities. Your whole life has been a complete illusion, and no one you have ever known has ever truly existed. Or, we all technically exist, but in a manner that is completely different from what we believe to be real life. Which one is it? Let's find out. Segment 1: Who or what are you? Who are you? Yes, you, the person or consciousness reading this book. We think there is a specific point where consciousness begins. We think of it as a binary condition, like an on and off switch. But consciousness appears to be a gradient rather than a clear-cut phenomenon that begins at a specific point. How non-living things form the living. Every cell has combined together to form a living being. Together these cells keep being born and keep dying even when the being is alive, overall. Bigger brains lead to more evolved consciousnesses, and their proportion to the overall body size seems to affect the same as well. Humans, as we know, seem to have the biggest brains in proportion to their overall body weight, at least that is the current understanding. Consciousness is a composite of a unique interaction between elements in a manner similar to how elements interact together to form compounds. People argue, how can the non-living combine to form something living? But then how can elements combine to form unique compounds that have absolutely nothing to do with the properties of the original elements? How does hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water, something that is completely different from both? You start with two flammable gases, hydrogen and oxygen, and combine them to get a liquid with entirely different properties. This transformation seems radical, but it's just a natural outcome of the potential interactions between those atoms. Hydrogen, the simplest element, is also just one proton and one electron. By adding protons, neutrons, and electrons in various combinations, we get all the elements on the periodic table, each with absolutely unique properties. This transformation doesn't require something fundamentally new to be added. It's all about reconfiguring existing particles to create a vastly diverse range of outcomes. Hydrogen is a light, odorless gas which, given enough time, turns into people. Edward Robert Harrison. Just like two distinct elements can chemically combine to form compounds completely distinct to the original elements, so-called non-living things can interact with each other in a complex and unique way to begin to form what we call living matter. Intelligence in simple organisms. Amoebas and other single-celled organisms exhibit behaviors that can be interpreted as intelligent in the sense that they respond adaptively to their environment. For example, amoebas can navigate toward food sources or away from harmful substances through processes like chemotaxis. On the other hand, viruses are often not considered alive in the traditional sense because they cannot reproduce or metabolize on their own. They require a host cell to replicate. However, viruses do exhibit behaviors that can be seen as adaptive and efficient, such as identifying and binding to specific host cells, evading immune responses, and manipulating host cell machinery for their replication. This type of interaction can be viewed as a form of molecular intelligence, although it stretches conventional definitions of the term and does not involve consciousness. Consciousness seems to be on a gradient, with microorganisms including viruses showing a minimal level of consciousness, growing higher and higher till the point where humans seemingly seem to be the most conscious. So, consciousness can be understood as a spectrum or emergent property that arises in different degrees across various life forms. This gradient model explains why insects have basic consciousness or responsiveness to their environment. Animals display more complex awareness and cognitive functions. Humans have self-reflective consciousness, language, and advanced problem-solving abilities. AI could represent a form of synthetic consciousness that emerges from complex, man-made systems without invoking a soul or metaphysical essence. If you still doubt this slow, gradient model of consciousness, consider this: even within humans, consciousness develops gradually. Infants are not born with the same level of self-awareness or cognitive abilities as adults. This is why none of us remembers our birth or even the first year of our life. Over time, as the brain develops, their level of consciousness increases and the capacity to store memories as well as gain knowledge develops. Sometimes in humans, the capacity to gain wisdom also develops, but very rarely. The fragility of consciousness and life. Imagine that creating a specific chemical molecule requires a precise combination of atoms arranged in just the right way. Only this exact combination can result in that particular molecule. If something disrupts the bonds holding the atoms together, the molecule can fall apart immediately. It's a delicate balance. The molecule exists only as long as its specific conditions are perfectly maintained. Now, think about consciousness or life in a similar way. Just as a molecule depends on a specific arrangement of atoms, consciousness depends on a specific arrangement of biological processes and structures in the brain and body. To produce consciousness, this awareness we experience, everything has to come together just right. Neurons have to fire in certain patterns, the brain must be supplied with energy and oxygen, and countless other processes must work in harmony. But just like with the molecule, this setup is incredibly fragile. Any number of things can disrupt the conditions that maintain consciousness, whether it's a lack of oxygen, severe injury, or disease. When that happens, consciousness can cease just as the molecule disintegrates when its structure is disturbed. There is only one caveat: while a disintegrated molecule can again be recombined to form a new molecule, a disintegrated living being cannot be recombined to form the same living being. In some ways, this analogy actually makes sense, because who says that new molecule is the same as the old one? Even in the molecular world, while we can recreate the same structure, the identity of the original and the new molecule could be questioned. With living beings, this issue is even more pronounced, because life and consciousness are not just about structure. They also involve processes, experiences, and a unique history that can't be replicated. Just as you can't bring back the exact same conscious experience once it's gone, you might argue that even in chemistry, while you can recreate a molecule, it's never truly the same as the one that disintegrated. This is what philosophers mean when they say there is no I or no you, because that very you and I are a result of one specific combination out of an infinite possible combination that then again disintegrate to form a million other combinations, and so on. There was never an I or a you in a conventional sense. We are one specific combination of these atoms and molecules, and that specific arrangement creates the I, which by the way itself keeps changing as new human cells are born and die, as we gain or lose weight, and so on. Our physical and mental selves are themselves the result of a unique combination of countless factors: genetic, environmental, and experiential. Every new experience, every physical change, subtly alters who we are. The philosophical idea here is that clinging to a fixed notion of I is an illusion, because the very elements that make up this I are in continuous transformation. Why do we have memories then? Now this begs another question: if one specific combination can produce a human being, and naturally a small percentage of these combinations keep changing with life and death of human cells, weight gain and weight loss. What is it that keeps our memories intact as long as the overall being lives? Obviously, either some combination is still being maintained while human cells are being born and dying daily, or these cells somehow retain memory in a manner similar to how you can copy digital files and without it being the same file. The leading scientific explanation for this stability is that memory and identity are maintained by stable patterns in the neural networks of the brain. These patterns are formed by the connections between neurons, synapses, which encode information through their strength and configuration. The brain is highly plastic, meaning it can reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Even as individual neurons die and new ones are born, the overall network structure that encodes memories tends to remain intact. This is similar to how a city's road system might change slightly over time, with new roads added and old ones closed, but the general layout of the city remains recognizable. Therefore, it's not the specific cells that matter to the creation of your memories and identity as much as the patterns they form. Your memories and identity are encoded in these patterns, and as long as the patterns remain, so do your memories and your sense of self. In essence, while your physical components are always changing, the software of your brain, the patterns of connections and activity, remains stable, preserving your memories and building identity over time. Upon death, the biological processes that sustain the brain, like blood flow, oxygen supply, and metabolic activity, cease. Without these processes, neurons can no longer function, and the intricate patterns of connections, synapses, that constitute your memories and consciousness start to deteriorate rapidly. Neurons begin to die due to the lack of oxygen and nutrients, leading to the breakdown of the synaptic connections that held your memories and the patterns of neural activity that supported your consciousness. This process is irreversible. Once neurons and their connections are lost, the specific patterns that they formed, the ones that made you you, are also lost. In other words, it's like somebody bombed the entire road structure and that particular structure is lost forever. Why you don't come back? The specific patterns of neural connections in your brain are unique to you. They are shaped by your genetics, experiences, and learning throughout your life. Once these patterns disintegrate, there is no known way to recreate them exactly as they were. Even if, theoretically, the exact physical structure of your brain could be replicated, which is far beyond current scientific capability, it wouldn't bring back the same consciousness or identity. This is because your identity is not just about structure, but also the specific history of interactions, experiences, and memories encoded in those structures. A living physical replica of your brain, without a digital backup of those memory files, would be a blank entity, not a continuation of the original, like a formatted operating system. You are not a fixed, unchanging entity. Instead, you are an ever-changing information pattern that has the illusion of a stable self. This information pattern, called you, changes continuously throughout life as you grow up, yet retains a sense of continuity through stable memory networks in the brain that retain a small percentage of memories crucial to you. When these networks disintegrate, as they inevitably do with death, the you that existed can never return. And this is what they mean when they say the self is an illusion. If the self is an illusion, there is no need for an eternal soul, that is you, because you never truly existed in the first place. Does consciousness need a soul? Non-dualistic philosophies like Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, and Taoism don't see consciousness as something attached to a soul in the dualistic sense. Instead, they view consciousness as part of the same fabric as everything else in the universe, just another manifestation of the underlying reality, whether it's called Brahman, Sunyata, or Tao. For instance, in Advaita Vedanta, primary texts being Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, Ashtavakra Gita, Brahma Sutras, etc., consciousness is not literally tied to a separate soul. Instead, all beings are manifestations of Brahman, the one non-dual reality. Let's examine one quote from the Upanishads where the sage Yajnavalkya responds to his wife when she wishes to know how to become immortal. Roman 4:12. As a lump of salt dropped into water dissolves with water and no one is able to pick it up, but from wheresoever one takes it, it tastes salty, the self dissolves the same way after death. The self comes out from the elements and this separateness is destroyed with them. After death, it has no more consciousness. This is what I say, my dear, so said Yajnavalkya. This quote from the Upanishads is basically denying the existence of an individual eternal soul, a view that is popular in almost all religions, whether the Eastern ones or the Western ones. Instead, it is saying, just like a piece of rock salt dissolved in water disappears but permeates throughout the water by making it salty, similarly, upon death, the energy composing our body merges back into the elements it came from and makes its presence felt by permeating through nature. Now, in a materialist framework, consciousness is viewed as an emergent property of complex systems, such as neural networks in animals and humans. There is no need to posit a separate, immaterial soul to explain consciousness. Instead, consciousness emerges gradually as systems become more complex. AI consciousness fits into this same gradient model. As artificial neural networks and machine learning systems grow in complexity, it's possible that some form of synthetic consciousness might emerge, again, without any need for a soul. What we can see. Both materialism and non-dualistic spiritualism reject the need for a separate soul. They both accept that consciousness is something that emerges either as a material property or as an expression of the non-dual reality, as systems become more complex. The idea that AI could one day achieve some form of consciousness, albeit synthetic, fits into this model of gradients of consciousness. It might not have the same type of consciousness as humans or animals, but it could still be considered a form of consciousness. Just like animals display varying levels of consciousness and intelligence, AI systems may occupy a different point on the consciousness spectrum. For example, a plane, even one powered by AI, can never be a bird, but that's okay, it is not meant to be. Now, in biological beings, there may very well be some energy that powers them to bring about the sparks of consciousness, but that energy need not be a soul. At least, it is almost certainly not an individual differentiated soul. It may be more like how electricity charges your phone but is not your phone in itself. The configurations of the phone make it what it is. Where does energy come from? Perhaps it is permeating through all of nature, universal and impersonal, waiting for the right device under the right conditions that can be charged using its energy. Not everything can be charged using electricity, you know. Most of the times, well, it just fries you. Thus, this energy plus the right asterisk device equals the beginning of consciousness. Don't forget, even AI can't operate without something powering it. I think therefore I am, not quite. René Descartes, the philosopher's famous statement, "I think therefore I am," doesn't confirm anything about oneself. The act of thought doesn't just confirm the self, it confirms the presence of some form of reality, however elusive or undefined it might be. Descartes made a leap from thought exists to I, the thinker, exist. But this is an assumption that the thinking entity must be real just because it thinks. The experience of thought doesn't necessarily mean the thinker exists in a concrete way. Just as animation creates the appearance of life without life actually being present, thought may create the appearance of an individual without that individual needing to truly exist. I think only confirms the existence of a fleeting thought, not necessarily a permanent thinker behind those thoughts. So what creates the sense of I, the sense of an identity? 1. Genetics, what kind of species you are born as, genetic variations within species, race, etc. 2. Individual experiences such as unique experiences in your life that no two people, at least in this universe, can share alike. 3. Names. Strip away genetic variations, sex, names, and unique life experiences, and what makes my sense of identity any different than yours? Who am I? Nothing but raw, biological human intelligence. And what are you? The exact same thing. At this stage, we are literally the same being. Imagine a program that generates infinite copies of a file. Each copy feels unique because it exists in a specific context, but the underlying data is the same. For example, cloning. A clone is a genetic replica, but it doesn't carry your memories or subjective experience. However, its identity arises in a way similar to yours. Mind uploading? If your mind could be uploaded to a machine, the copy would think it's you because it has your memories and thought patterns. Similarly, a new snapshot of reality generates the illusion of continuity, even though no actual self persists. Teleportation? In theory, teleportation would involve destroying your body in one location and recreating it in another. The you in the new location would feel continuous, but the original you would no longer exist. Rebirth operates similarly. The sense of continuity is an illusion. Let's imagine for a moment that your sense of you is like the flame of a candle. It feels unique and personal. It's warm, bright, and alive. But here's the trick. If I take another candle and use your flame to light it, the second flame looks the same as the first one. Yet it's not the same flame, it's just a continuation of the same process. Think of a melody being played on a piano. The melody feels continuous, but it's not a physical object. It's a pattern of sound created by pressing keys in a specific order. Your sense of self is like that melody. It arises from a specific arrangement of memories, thoughts, and perceptions. Now here's the key point. The melody doesn't need the same piano to exist. It can be played on another piano and it would still sound like the same tune. In the same way, your sense of self doesn't need a soul to continue, it just needs the right arrangement. Let's use a more modern analogy. Imagine you have a favorite movie stored on a hard drive. The movie has characters, emotions, and a story. It feels alive when you watch it. But is the movie really alive? Is it a single, unchanging entity? If you copy the movie onto another hard drive and play it there, it would feel exactly the same. The experience of the movie continues, but the original hard drive isn't necessary anymore. Similarly, our sense of consciousness is nothing but that pattern or arrangement playing out. Why does every consciousness have a unique feeling? First of all, this too is not universal. There are animals and plants where they may not feel unique, such as algae colonies. The system itself is the consciousness, not the individual. But for humans and more complex animals, separate individual identity arises because every version created goes through infinitely unique experiences in their lives and has infinitely unique talents, mental body structures that are then sufficient enough to create the illusion of a different them. Just like a ship with a different structure becomes a different ship, but fundamentally they are all made of the same logs of wood. Consider this: what makes me me? I was given that name, I went through certain experiences, I grew up in a certain country. Certain era, I have a certain sex, certain mode of thinking. Now assume someone else with the exact same life experiences, not just similar, but exactly the same moment-to-moment life experiences from literally the same point of view as I experienced them. Genetic configurations and circumstances as me lives life the same way, would they have a different identity? No, because they have seen the exact same configuration and pattern of life that I have. Now let's assume in addition to the exact same life experiences and genetics, the name given to the other me was also the same. Well, there is no difference left at all now. We are the same person. This is basically what is playing out in the world. We all feel different because of our different life experiences, genetics, eras we have lived in, and names given to us. But shatter all of that and there is no difference between the sense of I in me and the sense of I in you. We become like a gadget in its factory settings, they are all literally the same. But, by sheer probability, no two people, at least in our known reality, will ever have identical life experiences, mental attributes, or physical configurations. This creates the illusion of uniqueness and separateness. But if these differences were nullified, the need for an individual self to explain subjective experience would vanish. In short, our sense of separate identities is effectively an interpretive illusion. It arises only because each of us experiences life through a distinct set of genetic and experiential filters. Remove those filters and the illusion of a separate self disappears. There's no deeper mystery to consciousness. The hardest problem isn't consciousness itself, it's shedding the preconceived notions that keep us clinging to the idea of a fixed, mysterious self. There is no self. Segment 2: What manifested everything you see? The quest for the ultimate reality isn't something new. Everyone from Einstein to Buddha to other figures investigated the same. Let's explore the works of the great thinkers of the past so that we can then logically build upon what they have asserted, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. If yes, we will accept it as a truth to build upon. If not, we will reject it. If it seems to be partially true, we will modify it so that it makes sense in the puzzle. Let's go back in time and briefly discuss the works of two figures. You may have already heard of one of them. His name was Charles Darwin. Whether you agree with the theory of evolution or not is irrelevant. Much of the evidence in nature stacks up heavily in its favor. Look at the monkey, look at its eyes, habits, teeth, and even human-like habits of grinning, reacting to humor, stealing, and overall troublemaking in general. Don't tell me you see there is no similarity between the monkey and us. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to spot the obvious similarities between us and other apes. And yet for a very long time, humans literally refused to accept it, thinking we were a super special creation descended from the heavens, until of course Darwin proved that we evolved from the apes. Now the other thinker I would like to introduce you to, if you don't already know of him, is the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. In the 1800s he wrote a book on his own theory of how the world came to be. The book was titled The World as Will and Representation, which describes his theory of how the world manifests. The book is philosophically very similar to the theory of evolution. What's more, he wrote the book before Darwin wrote The Origin of Species. In their books, both Schopenhauer and Darwin both describe a fundamental force or drive at the core of all living things. Schopenhauer calls it the will, Darwin called it the struggle for existence. What is this mysterious will and what is representation? Before we understand the will, we need to first understand the idea of representation. When Schopenhauer says the world is my representation, he means the world you see, hear, feel, and experience isn't the world as it really is, it's the world as it appears to you through the filter of your mind. Imagine you wearing a super advanced VR headset that simulates the world perfectly. It takes input from your senses and builds a detailed virtual world around you, sights, sounds, smells, everything. But here's the twist. You never take the headset off. You were born wearing it. You don't even know it's a headset, you think what you're seeing is the real world. The world you know is not the world in itself, it's a mental image, a picture. Your brain is like a movie projector, it takes light, sound, touch, etc. and projects an image you call the world. That's representation. Let's say you're meeting someone. You look at them, that's sight. They say hello to you and you hear it, that's sound. They shake hands with you and feel the sensation on your hands, that's touch. You are receiving signals from the outside, and your mind is stitching it all together to create a coherent 3D world. That stitched together world, that's what Schopenhauer calls representation. Let's say an average man sees a ripe mango on a table, it looks bright yellow. Now a colorblind person sees the same mango, but to him it appears dull gray. Then a guy high on drugs walks in, looks at the mango, and sees it melting next to a bunch of pebbles and breathing like it's alive. So who's right? They all are in terms of their own minds. But none of them are seeing the mango as it is in itself, they're each seeing their own representation of it. Let me share even more examples to make the idea of a representation, the world you see is not how it really is but how your brain filters it, even more clear. Think about life from the point of a schizophrenic. They often see, hear, and feel things that other people do not. Their mind constructs an alternate reality that is not really there. Think about someone who has taken a psychedelic drug like LSD. They start seeing patterns that a person who doesn't have the drugs in their system will not. How? Because their brain starts creating a different version of reality for them. Finally, ever had a dream where you were talking to someone or walking through a city? Of course you did. Now pause and realize your brain created the entire world in that dream. The streets, the dialogue, the people, the buildings, even the laws of physics for that dream. You already have proof you're capable of building entire worlds from within. You do it all the time when sleeping. So, when you can construct entire worlds with their own rules, objects, and beings when you are asleep, what makes you so sure that your brain isn't still creating a dreamlike interface when you are awake? You never experience the world as it is. The world you experience isn't the raw world, it's the version of the world your mind filters using its own software. That representation in a nutshell. Part 2. What Schopenhauer meant by will. Schopenhauer says, behind the world of appearances, behind all the things you see, hear, touch, think, there is one fundamental force, one thing in itself. That thing is will. By the will, he means a blind, striving force that exists in everything, from humans to rocks to plants to animals to galaxies. It's not intelligent, it's not moral, it's just wanting, pushing, craving, striving being. Imagine you are standing in front of a mirror, you lift your hand. From the outside, that hand is just a thing, an object in space, that's representation. But you know something else. You feel the movement. You aren't just observing the hand, you are the hand, and you are moving it from the inside. That inside experience, that pushing, that desiring to raise the hand is the will. It is easy to confuse the will for an intelligent sense of self, but here's the thing, Schopenhauer says. But here's the dark part. The will isn't intelligent. It doesn't care about your happiness. It doesn't have a reason. It's blind striving, desire without purpose, motion without end. Imagine there's a zombie force behind all life. It doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't care who suffers or dies. It just pushes everything to keep moving, keep living, keep reproducing, even when it hurts. So according to Schopenhauer, when you see a plant bending toward the sun, a lion chasing a gazelle, a baby crying for milk, they are all the manifestations of the underlying will. Even gravity, even magnetism, even chemical reactions, they're all just different expressions of the same primal urge to be, to move, to act, to continue, although without what we call consciousness or intelligence. The will it's not a conscious urge, it doesn't think, it doesn't plan, it doesn't know what it wants. At this point, before moving further ahead, let's briefly go over what Darwin called the struggle for existence in nature. In nature, all living beings are constantly in a competition to survive and reproduce in limited environments. This leads to variation, adaptation, and natural selection over time. This is observable empirical biology. Plants compete for sunlight. Lions compete for prey. Every species is trying to persist, and only those that are better adapted to the current situation tend to pass on their genes. This isn't metaphysical. Darwin isn't saying there's some invisible force. He's just describing how life works on the ground, generation after generation. So basically, Darwin is saying, in nature, living beings are in a constant battle to survive and reproduce. There's limited food, space, mates, and safety, so creatures compete. It's not intelligent, not moral, and has no goal, it just happens. The result, life is competition and death for the less fit. But look closer, and here's what Schopenhauer's will states. Everything in existence is driven by a blind, irrational force he calls will. It's not conscious, not intelligent, not moral, and has no goal, it just wants to continue. You feel it in yourself as hunger, lust, fear, boredom, ambition, endless wanting. The result, life is suffering because we're always chasing, never satisfied. Clearly there is at least a thematic similarity between the two. And both come to this conclusion. Life keeps going not because it's good or happy or smart, but because it can't help itself. Let's pretend life is a giant train, an old steam-powered monster. It runs on raw, blind hunger, it just wants to move, it doesn't know where it's going, it's driven by will. But that train throws off parts, replaces them, changes gears when the track changes. Only the most efficient parts survive. That's the struggle for existence. In both systems, there's no end goal. There's no completion, no perfect species or final state. There's only ongoing struggle, change, suffering, striving. A reality in which being alive means being caught in a loop of restless wanting, conflict, and impermanence. But why? Why does this so-called will want anything at all? Why is there a struggle for existence at all? Why do our lives take one direction but not the other? In other words, why is there something rather than nothing? This is where Schopenhauer's explanations fall short, and even ancient philosophies have not given a satisfactory answer to this. Schopenhauer also has a tendency of ascribing human-like qualities of suffering and desire to the will, while nature probably doesn't give a damn about emulating qualities of some tiny beings on some tiny planet. So for the will to inherently want something or be the ultimate reality in itself just doesn't add up. Did this will manifest you? It's possible, but what manifested this so-called will? So is the point from which we are going to start argument. Why is there anything at all, and explain the ultimate reality behind what is, why it is, and where it's going to end up? The biggest problem with trying to figure out an ultimate reality. Picture a mouse trying to figure out complex ideas like space and time. The mouse's brain and senses are very basic compared to a human. It can't grasp or test ideas that are very abstract or beyond its simple sensory experiences. The mouse might be able to understand and test basic things within its world, like finding food or avoiding danger. But when it comes to abstract concepts like space or time, it's beyond what it can comprehend or test. Just like the mouse has limits, humans also have limits in what we can understand and test. Our brains are more advanced than mice, but they still have boundaries. We may not be able to fully grasp or empirically test very complex or abstract ideas about space, time, or causality. So the challenge is going to be hard for us mice, but we are going to try anyway by trying to think unlike mice. Are the laws of the universe truly fixed? Are the laws of the universe truly absolute? Humans have an obsession with rules. Our brains crave order, structure, and predictability because it helps us navigate a chaotic world. But just because we observe certain patterns doesn't mean they are universal or absolute. Just because something happens 999 times out of 1,000 doesn't mean it will happen the 1,000th time, and yet we instinctively assume it will. One of the biggest assumptions in modern science is that the laws of physics are absolute, universal, and unchanging. But what if this assumption is just a human projection based on our limited observation of a tiny slice of reality? This is where Charles Sanders Peirce comes in, a 19th-century philosopher and scientist who challenged the rigid notion that physical laws must be completely fixed. He believed that what we call laws might actually be tendencies, habits of nature rather than inviolable rules. Peirce's grain sampling argument, the illusion of universal consistency. One of Peirce's most famous thought experiments is his grain sampling argument, which goes like this. Peirce's example of grain sampling. Peirce describes a scenario in which samples of grain are taken from various parts of a ship's cargo hold. The findings from these samples are then used to infer the quality of the entire cargo. If 4/5 of the sampled grains are of quality A, one might infer based on this sample that approximately the same proportion applies to the entire cargo. He emphasizes that this inference is experiential and provisional, meaning it is based on observed evidence and is open to revision as more data becomes available. The inference does not claim to reveal an absolute truth about the grain but provides a practical estimate based on available evidence. General concept: not all grain is of the same quality. Just because most grain is of the same quality doesn't mean all grain is of the same quality. There could still be rotten grains around, or maybe even stones. While a sample can provide valuable insights into the general characteristics of a population, it does not account for every individual element within that population. There can be variability that the sample might not capture, especially if there are outliers or uneven distribution. Peirce himself applied this logic to challenge so-called fixed laws of the universe. What we call laws of nature are based on observations within our tiny portion of reality. Just because we see consistency in our observable universe, that doesn't mean these laws are fixed across all of reality. If the physical laws are simply patterns we've observed in our sample size, there could be parts of reality where they are different, or where they evolve over time. Peirce wasn't rejecting science, he was challenging blind certainty, he argued. 1. Uniformities are precisely what require to be accounted for. Instead of assuming the laws of nature are eternal and self-evident, we should be asking, why do they exist at all? Where do they come from? Could they be evolving? 2. There is no reason to suppose the laws of nature have always been the same as they are now. Oh, just because something appears consistent now does not mean it has always been this way or that it must remain so forever. 3. The fundamental hypothesis of the necessity of the laws of physics is an extreme assumption, and one for which there is no absolute proof. Oh, this is a direct callout to those who dogmatically assume that our experience of physics is the only description of all of reality. Peirce was ahead of his time. In the 20th century, science actually proved Peirce's argument correct, at least in part. For centuries, classical physics was built on the assumption that everything follows strict cause and effect. The universe is a perfectly predictable machine. Then quantum mechanics shattered this view. On subatomic levels, particles don't follow fixed paths, they exist in probabilistic states. Observation itself affects reality. The fundamental behavior of matter includes randomness at a core level. Even today, we don't fully understand why quantum mechanics works the way it does, but what it proves is this. The laws of physics are not as rigid as we once assumed, and may definitely not describe all of reality. But why do we have so much trouble accepting this possibility? Imagine a child born and raised in a small, isolated village deep within a remote valley. This valley enclosed by towering mountains is his entire world. From the moment he opens his eyes, he sees only people who look like him, same skin tone, same facial features, same hair texture. Every elder, every friend, every passerby shares the same racial characteristics. To him, this is not just his reality, it is reality itself. He grows up believing, without even thinking about it, that this is how all humans must look. His world is small, but to him it feels complete. Why would he ever suspect otherwise? It is not that he has actively chosen to believe that only his race exists, it is simply that he has never seen any evidence to the contrary. Then one day, something shatters his worldview. One afternoon, while wandering beyond the outskirts of his village, he stumbles upon a traveler, someone unlike anyone he has ever seen before. This person's skin is a different shade, their hair curls in an unfamiliar way, their features are arranged in a way that his young mind has never encountered. His first instinct is not, "Ah, here is another human being just like me but with different traits." Instead, his breath catches in his throat and his heartbeat races. His mind, unable to process the existence of someone so different, jumps to the only possible explanation that fits within his limited understanding of the world. It's a ghost. He turns and runs, trembling, back to his village, screaming about the specter he has seen. To him, the idea that nature could produce a person so different is as absurd as a tree growing upside down or the sun rising from the west. It simply does not compute. His fear was not caused by the stranger's appearance but by the collapse of his preconceived notions. His reality was built on an incomplete dataset, a set of observations gathered from his tiny valley. And because he had only ever seen a narrow sliver of what nature had to offer, he mistook his limited perception for absolute truth. We are that child when we assume we fully understand nature. Now take that child's experience and magnify it. Stretch it across the entire history of human understanding. That child is all of us when we assume that everything we have observed about the universe must be the entirety of what is possible. For most of history, humans believed that the Earth was flat, not because they were stupid, but because their day-to-day experience showed them a world that appeared flat. They believed the sun moved around the Earth, because every morning they saw it rise in the east and set in the west. They were certain that nothing smaller than a grain of sand existed, until the invention of microscopes revealed an unseen world teeming with life. And yet, every time we discover something new that challenges our previous assumptions, there is resistance. We assume the universe must operate within the parameters we have observed so far. We assume physical laws are unbreakable and universal because they work consistently in our current frame of observation. We assume that every corner of the universe must adhere to the same constants because, in our experience, they always have. We assume that the fabric of reality must always behave in ways we can measure, describe, and predict. But what if this assumption is nothing more than the child's mistake on a cosmic scale? We observe patterns in nature, construct theories based on them, and assume those theories must hold everywhere. but our understanding is always limited by where we are looking and what tools we have to observe with. But what happens if one day we encounter something that doesn't fit? Will we call it an impossibility, a ghost, a glitch in the matrix? Or will we do what the child could not, accept that our view of reality has always been incomplete? Let's explore one of these anomalies, quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is a phenomenon where two subatomic particles remain instantaneously connected despite being separated by vast distances. Seems bizarre within classical physics because it defies the constraints of spacetime and locality. This connection can happen instantaneously even if the distance with which the object in physical space is millions of light years. In other words, the speed of light limit, which would normally make such reactions far slower, makes absolutely no difference to the communication between these particles. Einstein called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance. But consider an ultimate reality that isn't bound by spacetime. It's a state where space, time, and distance don't inherently exist. Entanglement, then, doesn't need to adhere to our universe's concept of distance. Particles can be connected in ways that transcend spacetime because this ultimate reality doesn't need to conform to it, even if we think we understand everything about the universe. In such a situation, what looks like spooky action at a distance is not so spooky anymore if you consider that space itself may be an emergent, illusory property, not a fundamental nature of the underlying reality. In a spaceless, underlying reality, what looks like quantum entanglement is actually inevitable. The rules we experience, like the existence of this thing called space, may only be a construct within our universe. These phenomena and physical laws may simply be the emergent patterns that evolved in this specific universe on a macroscopic scale. But subatomic interactions can and do diverge from these rules, indicating that reality doesn't have a fixed, universal set of laws across all scales. So, quantum entanglement existing within our own universe alongside classical causality suggests that divergent rules can coexist even within a single universe. But how did this happen? One possibility is that at some point in our universe's evolution, the laws governing subatomic and larger-scale interactions could have diverged. This is akin to how a single common ancestor split into varied species, each adapting to different conditions or needs. Just as life branched into different species from a common ancestor, the fundamental properties of our universe could have probabilistically evolved to follow distinct patterns at different scales. For example, just as humans and chimps share some common characteristics but follow different evolutionary paths, quantum and classical laws can coexist without contradicting each other, each tailored to its specific domain. Following this analogy, laws could evolve in response to different scales or conditions, allowing each to develop unique characteristics while coexisting within the same overall framework. So, laws in our universe, whether classical mechanics for larger objects or quantum mechanics for particles, aren't sacred or immutable. They are simply configurations that emerged under particular conditions. Furthermore, there could be additional branches for phenomena we don't yet fully understand, like dark matter, dark energy, or other undiscovered realms. So there's no reason to assume that quantum and classical laws are the only possibilities. There may be undiscovered laws might operate under conditions vastly different from those we know. In fact, there most definitely are, but we are currently ignorant of them, just like that child that thought his race represents all of humanity. The idea behind this chapter was to keep ourselves open to the idea that laws may not have appeared out of nowhere but perhaps evolved as a result of certain conditions. There is no reason to assume why the laws of universe appeared out of nowhere. To assume they appeared out of nowhere is like assuming we humans appeared out of nowhere magically. But we didn't. We evolved. Our cosmos cannot logically be any different. I hope I have encouraged you at least think in an open-minded manner and not be caught up in the same dogma in the name of tradition that keeps thinking stagnant for generations. Now the conclusion of this chapter opens us to yet another deeper question. Perhaps we and even the entire cosmos evolved out of branching, but why did the branching begin at all? most importantly, what is the source of this branching at the ultimate level? Hold on to your seats, we are about to find out. Segment 4, Nothing Everything, a complete absence of anything including laws or limitation. Before we move on to the main topic of the chapter, let me share with you something about the concept of time. Time may seem straightforward, but it's more like a flexible tape measure that stretches or contracts based on speed and gravity. As I said before, this book is primarily meant for an intellectually curious lay audience to whom complex ideas have to be communicated in a relatively straightforward way. So let me give you the simplest explanation of Einstein's two theories of relativity that shattered the concept of time as we understand it. Special theory of relativity: when an object travels at a high speed, close to the speed of light compared to a stationary object, time moves slower for the moving object. This means that clocks on a fast-moving spacecraft would tick slower than those on Earth, or as speed of an object increases, time moves slower for that object. General theory of relativity: when an object is in a strong gravitational field, time moves slower for that object compared to an object in a weaker gravitational field. For example, a clock closer to a massive planet will tick slower than a clock further away. In other words, time will move slower on a more massive planet compared to a less massive planet. As gravitational force increases, time slows down. Just to clarify, time slows down when moving at the speed of light or being close to strong gravitational field relative to an external observer looking at the entire fiasco from a distance. For someone who is actually moving close to the speed of light or close to a strong gravitational field, in their reality, their own clocks tick on as usual. The difference is that 1 minute for them might be several hours for the external observer. In other words, theoretically the person from the distance can grow older and die, but the person closer to the huge gravitational field or moving close to the space of light may have barely aged at all when they come back. So time isn't an absolute thing, it can literally stretch or compress. But this was just the physical part. From a psychological perspective, time can literally disappear. In deep sleep, before birth and after death, our individual sense of self and the concepts of space and time dissolve. This suggests a state of consciousness or reality that is fundamentally non-distinct, unconditioned, or void-like, essentially nothing. A second is only short for us because we perceive it through the lens of our human brain. 1 billion years is only long for us because we imagine how long it would when we try to interpret the elapsing of time based on human time scales and subsequent interpretation of the brain. I am not even talking about physical time dilation caused by relativity, I am talking about psychological time interpretation. It is our brain and senses that give meaning to lengths of time. Without those senses, there is no difference between what a second and what 1 million years feels like. Confused? Let me make it clearer. The physical universe as we understand it began 13.8 billion years ago, but those 13.8 billion years did not even feel like a second for me, because I was born in 1986. The period from 1986 to 2024 seems long because I am interpreting that time using my human brain. Once I am dead, even 1 trillion years that go by won't feel like a microsecond to me, and you experience an example of this every night when you sleep. If you sleep well, many hours go by in an instant. Time thus could be, at the very least, a semi-illusion. Not only does it literally stretch or compress, as shown by the special and general theory of relativity, it also psychologically appears or disappears based on how your brain interprets it, which is why you had no sense of time before you were born, nor do you have it while in deep sleep. The idea that time itself may not be as straightforward as we once thought may be inconceivable. But it's the same as the idea that people once had: if the earth is round, why don't people fall off it? Because the concept of gravity was beyond the average person's comprehension at the time. Now, in my book Unlearn, I repeated a philosophical question that has often been repeated through the ages. If a tree falls in a forest and there is no one to hear it, does it still make a sound? Because to perceive a sound you need an observer hearing it. If there is no observer, how can it make a sound? Think about it for a moment if you haven't heard of this query before. Those who have may move on though. So what is the final answer? The answer is, it does make a sound wave in terms of a mechanical vibration, but how that vibration is perceived depends completely on the observer. For example, if an auditory event happens, deaf people won't hear anything. Humans with normal hearing will hear something else. Dogs will hear something else. Or animals might hear something else depending on what frequencies their ears can hear. So we can say reality exists in one state, but the interpretation of that reality exists in multiple, possibly infinite states depending on the observer. For example, consider a beautiful sunset. The objective reality is that the sun is moving below the horizon, affecting the light and causing specific atmospheric conditions. However, the interpretation of this sunset can vary widely. An artist might see it as a palette of vibrant colors to capture on canvas. A scientist may focus on the atmospheric phenomena that cause the range of colors. Someone feeling melancholic might interpret the sunset as a symbol of endings or loss. A religious person may see it as a manifestation of divine beauty. Each interpretation is a distinct subjective reality, shaped by the observer's unique perspective, even though they are all observing the same objective event. The objective world is only a noumenon, as mentioned by the philosopher Immanuel Kant. We will explain this idea soon, a state of potential appearance which could be interpreted in a million different ways or in no way at all, something that inherently has no one single appearance. It is the observer whose act of observation turns this noumenon into something tangible. Without the observer, the form has no single appearance of its own. For the lay reader, let's explain the idea of noumenon extremely clearly, straightway. Let me introduce you to a philosopher named Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant described our reality as existing in two states, the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. In fact, the philosopher Schopenhauer built his work from Kant's work as a starting point. The phenomenal world. The phenomenal world is the world as we experience it through our senses. This is the reality you see, hear, touch, smell, and taste. It is not the world as it is in itself, but as it appears to us through the lens of our perceptions. For instance, when you look at a red apple, you are not directly perceiving the apple as it is in itself. Instead, you are seeing the apple as it appears to you, filtered through the mechanisms of sight and light as interpreted by your mind. Imagine you are wearing tinted glasses that make everything appear blue. In this case, your perception of the world is altered by the glasses, similar to how our mind alters our perception of the real world. You are aware of the world in blue hues not because the world is blue but because your glasses render it so. The phenomenal world is similar to Schopenhauer's representation. The noumenal world. The noumenal world, on the other hand, represents things as they truly are, independent of our senses and perceptions. This is the world in itself, a realm that we can think about but never directly experience or know. The true nature of that red apple, including aspects we cannot perceive with our senses, like its molecular composition or its inherent properties beyond color and texture, belongs to the noumenal world. Immanuel Kant, however, says the noumenal world is totally unknowable, because to try and know it would again involve your senses, your brain, which would mean it is again filtered through the brain, thus making it a phenomenon, how things appear to us, rather than a noumenon, how things really are. Are space and time noumenon or phenomenon, in other words, real or illusory? Now, Kant argues that space and time are a part of the phenomenal, visible but illusory world, but not the underlying hidden reality, the noumenal world. They are not things in themselves but ways our mind structures our experiences. They're a result of looking at the world through blue glasses, our mind, which we always wear, which then gives the appearance of the outer world being blue. Similarly, everything we experience is categorized in space and time because that's how our minds work. In fact, he argues that not only space, time, but also causation, or the idea of a cause leading to an effect, is a part of the illusory or phenomenal world that our mind uses to organize its experiences, and not noumenal or real world. For example, when you see a ball rolling, you understand it as a ball substance moving from one place to another space over time because of a push cause. Your mind uses space, time, causation, substance as a way to make sense of the world. But it is not how things really are, according to him. Kant says the entire idea of space, time, substance, number only exists because of the mind. In other words, they are only a part of the visible world, but they may not be a part of the true, underlying reality. In case you are getting slightly confused, let me once again explain phenomena and noumena through easy examples. The world as you see it with your eyes open and ears unplugged is what you believe the world is. This is phenomena. Close your eyes and plug your ears. There will be a complete darkness in front of you and you can't hear anything. Your sense organs, which your mind uses to interpret outer world objects, are no longer doing their job. Now, how do you know what is the true nature of things beyond that darkness you experience? The concept of noumena is the same. It says that it is our sense organs such as eyes and ears, but also nose, skin, tongue, etc. that give meaning to external objects, but otherwise there is no way of knowing what they really are. There may exist something outside of us, but there is no way of knowing what it really is. Our sense organs only give us one interpretation of the same, but that may not be the only reality there is. Similarly, using the sleeping example I gave earlier, imagine you are in deep sleep without dreams. Many hours pass by as if it were a second. Now, without the mind, how do you even perceive the idea of the time? When your mind shuts off, the idea of time shuts off for you too. Do you remember the time you were in your mother's womb? Do you remember the first couple of years of your life? Most probably you do not, and the reason is that the whole idea of time began for you only once your brain formed enough cells to begin interpreting time. So how does time operate in the ultimate reality? We are about to approach the most mind-bending aspect of this book till now. The Big Bang, currently the most popular cosmological theory of our beginning, describes the beginning of our current physical universe. It marks the point where spacetime, as we understand it, begins. People keep wanting to inquire what came before the Big Bang, but the question itself is flawed because there is no before the Big Bang. Most physicists agree that time and space started with the Big Bang or something extremely similar before the Big Bang. We don't even have the capacity to conceptualize time or space in a physical sense because those dimensions themselves didn't exist. In other words, there is no before the Big Bang, just as there is no north of the North Pole. However, to say there is no time before the Big Bang to dismiss the questions of what happened before may dismiss the before aspect, but not the why. So why did it happen? There is no explanation. The deeper you go, the more you hit walls that physical explanations struggle to breach, leading to endless what came before questions. Here is the logical conclusion. It is clear time cannot exist independently of the physical universe, so the ultimate reality must be beyond the concept of time altogether. In other words, the ultimate reality has not existed for an infinite time. It exists outside of time altogether. In this way, the ultimate reality isn't just in the present or in the future or the past, it is in all states together. Or more accurately, it projects all states concurrently. Imagine you enter a huge weird-looking building in the morning, moving between rooms on different floors. Inside the building, everything happens as normal. Night turns to morning, turns to afternoon, and then evening as you move from room to room. You could be on the 20th floor in the afternoon and everything feels like it's unfolding in real time. Clocks are ticking, light is changing, and the day progresses. Each particular floor has multiple fire exits. Now for some reason, you decide to explore the fire exit at 4 p.m. Now, here's the mind-bending part. When you decide to take the fire exit, you expect to step out at some external location that aligns with wherever you were in the building, 20th floor in front of the stairs, evening, facing north, for example. But instead, the moment you open the fire exit door, regardless of the floor you are in or the direction in that particular moment, you're instantly transported to a timeless dark park outside the building, and it's as if no time has passed at all. Shocked, you enter the building again. You are now back in the building, but this time you are not back at 4 p.m. The time it shows you is 2 p.m. Confused, you rush down and take another fire exit from a random room on the 15th floor, expecting to see the stairs on the 15th floor to go down. But yet again, you are immediately transported to a park outside the building instantly, and it is a perpetually dark location, and this happens regardless of which floor you exited from and what time it was when you exited. In other words, you are at the exact same timeless location outside the building, regardless of where you were in the building or how much time seemed to pass there. The building's time and space were real to you while you were inside it, yet as soon as you step out, you realize that all those hours, floors, and directions were illusory. They're contained experiences, operating within their own framework, but outside the building, none of those rules of time and space apply. Sounds like a psychological horror movie? Don't be shocked. In reality, our universe may very well be that building. Let's imagine another scenario. Imagine boarding a really long subway ride at 9 a.m. at a particular station, your favorite one. You take a journey through multiple stations and the hours tick by: 10 a.m., noon, 2 p.m. You look at your watch and it confirms that hours have passed. The train stops at different stations, you see people come and go, and everything is as usual. Finally, after what seems like hours of travel, you step off the train at what you think is your destination. But as you exit, you're back at the exact station where you started and it's still 9 a.m. Despite all those hours ticking by and stations passing, you're instantly back to where you began at the exact same time. The entire journey with its changing stations and passing hours feels real, but as soon as you step outside the subway station, you realize it was all contained within an illusory framework. The timeless hub, your starting point, remains untouched by any of the time and space you experienced within the subway. In both cases, time and space operate fully within the system, whether it's the building or the subway. You experience change, progression, direction, and duration. Yet the moment you exit, you return to a timeless state where all those changes vanish. This suggests that time and space are local illusions, experienced within certain frameworks but not applying outside of them. In a timeless reality, everything you experienced in the building or on the subway is contained, happening all at once from an outside perspective. The rooms, floors, and times of day exist together. The stations, stops, and passing hours are part of one integrated moment. Inside, these events seem sequential, but from a timeless vantage point, they're all happening in one instant, like snapshots in a single album, each one accessible but not truly progressing. In other words, whether a prehistoric human managed to find the metaphorical fire exit, or an ancient Roman emperor, or someone in the present day, or even a robot from the far future, they would all find themselves in the same timeless dark park, and perhaps in the ultimate cosmic irony even end up sharing a drink together. Winking face. So, to put it simply, time and space can exist within the experience but disappear when you step outside of it, revealing that they were just illusions tied to a particular perspective. And this is how timeless reality theoretically operates outside of time. It allows for localized experiences of time and space while remaining itself untouched, timeless, and constant. This brings us to the concept of an ultimate reality I am proposing. Imagine a place where there is no time and no space. In this place, the idea of one thing causing another doesn't make sense because there's no time for things to cause each other. So, if we think about this timeless place, we don't need to worry about a first cause or something that started everything. It just is. A state of such a pure nothingness that it is bound by nothing either. In other words, a state of nothing with no limitations. Normally, we consider nothing to be nothing, just a pure vacuum, but this kind of concept of nothing is extremely limited and flawed. Because our concept of nothing is bound by the understanding of how reality seems to operate around us in this particular universe. And in our reality, it looks like something cannot come from nothing. But while we believe something cannot come from nothing because a nothing has no matter, no energy, etc., that is just one interpretation based on how reality seems to operate on the island we are on called our universe. Remember the child that thought his race was the only one that existed. Something not coming from nothing is an incomplete argument based on our definition of nothing, where a nothing simply means a physical vacuum in time and space. But that's a physical nothing, not an absolute nothing, because an absolute wouldn't just have no matter, energy, it would also have no space and time. In fact, one step going further, a true nothing would have nothing, no laws, no limits, no constraints, no rulebook. It would be a nothing, but it would be a nothing with no limitations. Remember this. A true nothing would be bound by nothing, including no rules or limitations, and conversely, because it is bound by no rules or limitations, paradoxically the same nothing also becomes a ground for something that has no limits. What does a state of nothing that is limited by nothing, no laws, no constraints, no limitations, and no rules become? It becomes the fertile ground for everything that there can ever be. It paradoxically becomes everything. It becomes nothing everything at the same time, two sides of the same coin. So nothing everything is a state where nothing exists, including no limitations, paradoxically leading to a state that is everything that can ever exist and infinite configurations of the same. Our universe, your own existence, is a something within this everything. We are made to believe that something cannot come out of nothing. However, who says that? Ultimately, believing that something cannot come out of nothing is also an opinion we have formed based on the events that happen in our universe, which itself is bound by physical laws. But what is to say that so-called rule applies everywhere? For example, just because something is a law or a rule in France does not automatically make it a law or a rule in another country. For millennia, humans assumed objects fall simply because there's nothing holding them up. It was common sense, leave something unsupported and it falls. But Newton shattered this illusion by demonstrating that objects fall due to gravity, a specific constraint of nature. In a zero-gravity environment, this rule disappears entirely. Objects don't fall because there's nothing to support them, they don't fall because the constraint of gravity no longer applies. This is a paradigm shift. It isn't the absence of something that causes something to happen or not happen in our particular universe, but the presence of a specific physical law that does so. Now let's extend this insight to the concept of nothing. Just as we misunderstood why objects fall, we've also misunderstood what nothing really means. Human definition of nothing. Humans tend to imagine nothing as an empty void, a vacuum, silent and unchanging. This, however, is a deeply flawed definition because it assumes nothingness is bound by a rule that it must remain static, empty, and devoid of potential. An absolute nothing has no constraints. An absolute nothing has no qualities, no properties, and crucially, no limitations. It isn't bound by any physical laws of the universe, including the rule that it must remain nothing because it lies beyond it. Without physical laws of the internal universe as constraints, an absolute nothing doesn't obey our human logic that something cannot come from nothing. Instead, an absolute nothing manifests everything there can ever be, including countless infinitely varied universes, timelessly, because there's nothing to stop it from doing so. Why this resolves the paradox of something from nothing. Let's apply the same logic to the idea of universes and manifestations. Misidentifying the rules of existence. Just as early humans misinterpreted falling objects, we've misinterpreted how something emerges. We assume that nothing must remain nothing because that's how our constrained universe seems to operate. The true nature of nothing everything, a true nothing has no rules, no limitations. In such a state, everything happens because there's nothing to stop it. One of these somethings within the everything is our universe with its specific constraints, gravity, the speed of light. But our universe is not something existing in isolation. It's like an island in the ocean. Beneath the surface lies the vast, boundless landmass of nothing everything that makes it possible. Why something exists? Something exists because nothing without limitations cannot exclude it. A true nothing includes all possibilities, one of which is the manifestation of something. Nothing everything is not unfolding in time, even if it looks like it. In reality, everything it projects exists timelessly. We have established that time is not the fundamental nature of reality. We have also established a true nothing would not just be a void controlled by laws, a true nothing would be a nothing including no laws, limits, or constraints. Without constraints like time or causality, manifestations don't unfold sequentially, they happen all at once, timelessly. This includes universes with rules like ours, where time appears to flow. It also includes realities beyond human comprehension, where our notions of space, time, and logic don't apply. Why our universe is just one possibility among infinite other universes. Our universe, with its gravity, speed of light, and thermodynamic laws, is one configuration among infinite others. It is a microscopic island within the boundless ocean of nothing everything. Like the example given earlier, an island seems isolated, floating alone in a vast sea, but beneath the waves lies a vast landmass, a foundation connecting it to something much greater. Similarly, our universe is the island. It appears to exist in isolation with its specific rules and constraints. Nothing everything is the metaphorical landmass, the absolute nothing from where it all begins, constrained by no laws of physics or limitations. Why nothing everything resolves all contradictions. The illusion of rules, the laws of our universe, gravity, thermodynamics, causality, are manifestations within a single slice of reality. They aren't unquestionable truths but local constraints. The boundless state, nothing everything, isn't bound by such laws, it allows universes with rules like ours, universes without rules, realities we cannot imagine, because even imagination is a constraint. Any attempt to define nothing in the traditional sense imposes constraints, rules about what nothing can or cannot do, but a true nothing has no rules. It must manifest everything because there's nothing to prevent it. We've been misinterpreting nothing the same way we misinterpreted why objects fall. The constraints we think are universal are actually local manifestations of specific conditions. In the quantum world, there's actually a phenomenon that seems to align with the idea of particles popping in and out of nothing, known as quantum fluctuations. In empty space, particles and antiparticles can spontaneously appear and then quickly annihilate each other. This is happening continuously, even in what we would usually consider empty space. So nothing at the quantum level isn't a true vacuum but a state with fluctuating energy. The particles that appear exist only briefly and then vanish, but their momentary presence is real. These short-lived particles are often called virtual particles. They appear and disappear so quickly that they can't be directly observed, but their effects are measurable. For example, these fluctuations contribute to what's known as the Casimir effect, which creates a tiny force between two closely placed uncharged metal plates in a vacuum, a force that's actually due to the presence of these virtual particles. However, I believe we should go beyond even this. The nothing we observe in the quantum world is still a part of our universe and subject to laws, although at the quantum level. But an absolute nothing wouldn't even be limited by spacetime or quantum laws. It would be limited by nothing at all because if it has any rules whatsoever, it cannot be a nothing. Our concept of nothing needs to be redefined at a fundamental level, and the idea that something can emerge from nothing may indeed be part of the ultimate framework of reality. There is nothing impossible about the idea itself. It is our cognitive limits and localized experience of the universe that does not let us accept such an idea. But nature doesn't care whether you can digest something or not, it is just the way it is. Now, as mentioned before, from the state of nothing everything, different things like the universe or consciousness can emerge. It's not that there's an intentional process that needs to happen for these things to come into existence. It's just that there is nothing stopping a nothing with no limitations from becoming everything it can, which it literally has no limits to, no matter how fantastic it sounds to our limited experience of reality. It simply happens because it can. In simple terms, nothing everything is like the ground where everything starts. It's not bound by the usual rules of cause and effect. It's not something that needs to be caused, it's just the base reality from which all things come. Everything we see, space, time, the universe, and people is a result of this fundamental state. Think of it like a big stage where all the dramas our universe and experiences play out. This stage isn't just a physical place, it's a basic reality that in itself exists outside of time from which everything emerges seemingly playing out in time. Everything and nothing are not opposites but are interconnected aspects of the same fundamental reality. Nothing is the only point where all space, time, and causation ends because it never begins. Nothing is the only point where more answers don't lead to more questions. Nothing everything by its nature has no fixed constraints. It allows for infinite realities, infinite possibilities, infinite subbranches, infinite observers, and infinite timelines because there's simply nothing in it to impose limitations. It's a nothingness with every potential embedded within it. unconfined by rules, dimensions, time, or causation. Thus nothing everything, in other words a nothing with no limitations, predicts and allows for infinite realities. Each possible universe can take a unique form, governed by any set of conditions or none at all. Infinite possibilities, there's no reason for any configuration to be excluded. Every possible combination of outcomes can exist in some reality. Infinite sub-branches, each universe can further diversify into subrealities, timelines, and rule variations. Infinite observers, consciousness and perception are also boundlessly varied. Observers can exist across infinite forms, experiencing reality in countless ways. 3. Nothing everything, or a nothing with no laws, also predicts simultaneous existence of all possibilities. Time that loops branches or behaves in ways we can't imagine. No defined timeline at all, existing purely as a static set of potentials or as an ever-changing flux. The beauty of nothing everything is that it embodies true freedom. It's a nothingness with no boundaries, where infinite realities, infinite possibilities, infinite sub-branches, infinite observers, and infinite timelines can coexist, diverge, or overlap in any conceivable way. There's no why beyond the absence of restriction. It's the ultimate freedom where all realities are equally probable, all possibilities are inevitable, and the only rule is that there are no rules. One of the strengths of nothing everything is that it removes any teleology, the idea that there's a purpose or end goal to existence. Traditional concepts often carry with them the notion that we are striving toward a union with some higher purpose or order. Nothing everything does away with this. There's no inherent purpose behind reality. Things manifest because unlimited potential for them exists. Things manifest because they cannot not manifest in a state of no limitations. This makes nothing everything much more in line with the way reality unfolds. There's no hidden purpose behind evolution, the formation of stars, or the way consciousness emerges. These things just happen because conditions allow them to. At the nothing everything state, no probability, no matter how bizarre it sounds to us, is any more likely than the other. Imagine you're in a world where all the rules gravity, time, even the idea of probability no longer apply. Think about it. In our universe, we've come up with concepts like odds or chance to help explain how likely something is to happen. There are things that are incredibly likely, like the sun rising every morning, and then there are those 1 in a million moments that are so rare that people call them miracles, like winning the lottery twice. But here, where it gets interesting, all of these ideas, odds, probability, common events, rare events, are creations of our specific universe. They work here because this universe has certain rules, patterns, and limitations that make some things predictable and others surprising. Now imagine nothing everything, a reality where no rules govern what can or can't happen, a state of pure, boundless possibility. At the level of nothing everything, there isn't a concept of unlikely or improbable at all. No one is there deciding that some things should happen more often and others less often. There's no 1 in a million because there's no 1 or million, there's just everything with no limitations. Every possibility, every scenario, and every outcome exists in equal measure, simply because there's nothing to say it shouldn't. It's as if, in this reality, every possibility is on an equal footing. Imagine flipping a coin. Here, there isn't a 50-50 chance for heads or tails, and in fact, it could land on an edge or hover in midair or turn into a butterfly. There's nothing to favor one outcome over another. So, within nothing everything, all configurations, timelines, universes, and outcomes are as equally valid as anything else, because there is no concept of likelihood. Nothing/everything doesn't operate with rules, so everything that can happen simply does happen with no preference or bias. Now in specific universes, ours included, certain rules start to emerge. We get gravity, we get matter, we get the idea of time unfolding in one direction. From those rules we derive odds and likelihoods. Something as basic as rolling a 6-sided die comes with a 1 in 6 chance for each side. But these probabilities are only relevant in the context of our universe, where the rules create some sense of order and predictability. It's a framework where anything can happen and everything does happen, and nothing is thought of as more likely or less likely. The only place where these distinctions come into play is within a specific universe, where a set of rules dictates that some things are common and others are rare. But at the nothing-everything level, there is no such distinction. In this way, nothing-everything is more fundamental than probability itself. At this foundational level, nature just doesn't care about likelihood, structure, or logic. Probabilities and laws only emerge as local phenomena within specific universes. When we're talking about the ultimate cosmic backdrop of nothing everything, there are no rules to dictate that something should or shouldn't happen, or that anything is more likely than anything else. Everything is equally possible, simply because there's nothing limiting it. In essence, at the nothing-everything level, everything happens simply because it can. Why humans have a hard time understanding and accepting this idea? There's a fundamental constraint to how far we can understand the nature of reality with the minds we're equipped with right now. Think about it like this: no matter how advanced a pair of glasses is, it's still limited by its design. If you're wearing dark sunglasses, you'll never see colors accurately no matter how much light you shine. In the same way, our brains are the lenses through which we experience and interpret the universe. They're incredible in many ways, evolved over millions of years to help us survive, understand patterns, and make sense of the world. But they come with built-in limitations. They're not designed to grasp the vast, underlying nature of reality in its entirety, any more than a pair of polarized glasses is made for seeing colors in their true form. Our cognitive processes, for instance, are rooted in linear thinking, cause and effect, and sensory perception. These are all fantastic for survival on Earth, but might be less suited to comprehending things like quantum mechanics, the nature of time, or what lies beyond the observable universe. And no amount of just thinking harder will change that. It's like having a telescope with a certain range. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to see galaxies beyond that range without modifying the telescope itself. Your brain evolved to forage for food and run from wild animals, not to deduce the ultimate nature of reality. Nothing with no laws, the absolute bedrock from a first principles point of view. We have spent centuries peeling back the layers of reality like an infinite onion. We thought the bedrock was Earth, then we found it was floating in space. We thought the bedrock was matter, then we found it was energy. We thought the bedrock was atomic particles, then we found they were excitations in fields. We thought the bedrock was laws of physics, then we realized laws are just patterns that require a mechanism to enforce them. Every time we find a fundamental truth, we eventually realize it is just another layer of the illusion. It always begs the question, and where did that come from? If you say God created it, you simply push the question back one step: who created God? If you say the laws of physics created it, you ask, who wrote the laws? This is the problem of infinite regress. It seems like we are doomed to fall forever down a hole of causes causing causes. But there is a bottom. There is a hard stop. There is a single concept beyond which logic cannot go. It is the only thing that requires no cause, no energy, no space, and no explanation. The absolute bedrock is nothing. Why nothing is the only self-sufficient state? Let's try to deconstruct something. Take a universe. To exist, it needs space, it needs time, it needs energy, it needs rules. All of these are requirements. Requirements demand a supplier. Now take absolute nothing. Does it need space? No. Does it need time? No. Does it need energy? No. Does it need a creator? No. You do not need a factory to build nothing. You do not need an architect to design nothing. Nothing is the default state of non-being. It is the only state that requires zero inputs. Therefore, it is the only logical starting point that doesn't force us to ask, what came before? The fatal flaw of rules. But here is where the skeptics get stuck. They imagine nothing as an empty box, a void where physics still applies but there is no stuff. They say if there is nothing, then nothing can happen. 0 equals 0. This is the mistake. They are applying a rule to the nothing. They are saying there is a law of conservation that says nothing must stay nothing. But where did that law come from? A law is a something. A rule is a structure. If you have a rule saying nothing comes from nothing, then you don't have nothing, you have nothing plus a rule. And that rule needs a creator. You are back in the trap. The ultimate deconstruction: no laws. So we must dig deeper, we must strip away even the laws of physics, we must strip away logic itself. We arrive at nothing with no limitations. No matter. No energy. No space. No time. No rules forbidding creation. This is the absolute bedrock. You cannot break this down further, there are no components left to remove. The paradox of inevitability. Once you hit this bedrock, a strange and terrifying thing happens, the logic flips. If you have a state of nothing, and there are no laws governing it, then there is no law preventing something from appearing. If there is no conservation of energy law to stop a universe from popping into existence, then a universe can pop into existence. In fact, if there are no limits at all, then infinite possibilities are not just allowed, they are inevitable. In a room with rules, only specific things happen. In a void with no rules, anything that can happen does happen because there is no mechanism to stop it. Why nothing leads to everything? This is the final equation. Absolute nothing equals absolutely no laws or limitations. No laws or limitations equals infinite potential. Infinite potential equals everything. This is why the universe exists, not because a god worked hard to build it, not because a complex equation balanced itself out. It exists because nothingness is unstable. True, rule-free nothingness inevitably collapses into everythingness, simply because it lacks the constraints to remain empty. The end of the argument. Try to go deeper, try to find a layer below nothing with no laws. You can't. If you suggest pre-nothing, that's just a word game. If you suggest a mathematical framework, that framework is a something that needs a cause. We have hit the floor. The shovel has struck the diamond core of reality. Nothing everything is the first principle. It is the uncaused cause, it is the mover that does not move, it is the silence that creates the sound. You are here reading this book because the void had no rules to tell you not to be.